Ever wonder what makes the greats great? What makes the successful successful? What makes the brilliant brilliant? Our Tuesday meetups with the celebrities of pharma industry and science are your one-stop shop to all these answers and more. Join us for Pies of Life, an initiative of the Biopatrika Industry Mentorship Program, where we bring your dream mentors to you.
Quite an experience working with customers across, whether it be Ahmedabad, whether it be Delhi, whether it be Shanta, Reliance, etc. It's been quite an experience. And then of course the first startup, which is so different from the second startup. Well, the first one was in the biosimilar space between 2007 and 2012, and that's really when it is a really nice team of 27 people. We were located in Pena, and Pena was the only industrial hub we could afford then, because Jigni Bomasandra was unaffordable, right? And we were located in Pena, and fortunately that's really where all the vendor partners were, so it made a lot of sense. And we developed a pipeline which we ultimately strategically sold to Strides. You're familiar with Strides and you're familiar with Stellis, right? So the entity that I created called InBioPro is now called Stellis, and it's with and it's a part of the Strides group, right? So the first, the interesting part of the first startup was, I needed investor money. In biotech, there's nothing that happens without money. I needed investor money in 2007. This is, and that's when I was pregnant. And I didn't think that investors would want to invest in one of the founders who's just pregnant, and then 1 year later they put in money, and what's going to happen to theirs, right? So I kind of hid it that I was pregnant. I went and pitched, thinking that these are like best kept secrets, and how foolish is that? But anyway, but it's a fun story to tell, because I think Axel's kind of been supported me throughout the first one and now the second one. But it's been an amazing learning. We were on our own, and then we became strategic partners with Strides. And when we did it with Strides, it was like working with Biocon all over again, where somebody's telling you what to do. But it was interesting because different people telling me what to do, and differently telling me what to do. But it was nice. We did a strategic merger, and then we sold it. And then, of course, Zumutor story you're familiar with, I guess, from the interactions we have had with either Bicara or Biocon, or from the website. Uh, Zumutor's kind of differentiated itself with platforms, the immuno-oncology pipeline, and now of course having NK focus. Uh, it's also taught me in my own journey that money is not everything, but money is extremely important in the entrepreneurial journey, especially in a biotech company. And in biologics like ours, you have to burn a lot of money before you see light of day of development of an asset, right? And it's not like any of these kind of e-com platforms where you quickly set up a platform and you see traction on the site, etc. So I think even in even in this, I think it's the investor education that's also happened. Investors have learned biotech, I think, because of folks like us, and they're continuing to learn it from us. So it's been an interesting learning curve for them, for us, and for me personally, kind of getting to know different people. And then of course the pandemic, everything changed. All that you thought you knew in a particular way has absolutely kind of stood its test. And then now we have a new normal. So kind of uh, I think learning to pivot all over again with this new normal and see where that goes. So that's the meandering story I have told you. Happy to answer questions or stuff like that, yeah, which you might have.
Yeah, so go ahead as usual. If you can ask questions, raise your hand, and
I was wondering, I guess the toughest part about being a scientist and then moving to business and everything is the transition. So, what kind of strategies did you implement in your environment to help you transition from being a scientist to, and I guess it started with going to IIM, and then from there becoming completely focused into the business end of the pharmaceutical industry?
So, well, a partial answer to that is yes. I was exposed to the kind of, the incubator cell in IM, which is the NSR
Yep.
cell. The NSR cell is not focused in biotech, but it's completely focused in, kind of other avenues. One is that, but in my mind somewhere, I thought that getting an MBA under the belt would also mean you kind of get the business side of things, right? And
Okay.
you get to do portfolio management, and you kind of get to do supposedly cooler, like traveling kind of stuff and things like that. That really didn't. That I must say that didn't happen. But what it did is it expensively gave me an avenue to network, which was not available before. Otherwise, personally, I think an MBA is a national waste of time. It just tells you a little bit of everything, and then you go around expensively networking, etc., which is, I guess, one of the things that an MBA does. But yeah, so to kind of get to your question, I think there was at that point in time when I was just finishing up with Malipur, uh, and this is back in kind of 2006, right? Is when I realized that there is a certain need with regard to bigger biopharmas wanting biosimilar development done. Either they were investing to kind of look into their own teams carving out and kind of reaching that potential, or they were willing to look at partners. Right at that point, they were looking to look at partnerships. And for me, what it did teach me was I spent a couple of months with Evistagen, and Evistagen had this relationship with Cipla, and Cipla was looking to do a pipeline of biosimilars. That really never realized or saw light of day because of other reasons. But it did kind of teach us and a couple of others who wanted to do the startup, saying there is a need, right? And there is capability by means of scientists. So this whole thing can come together. Thankfully, I've been surrounded by like my parents who are from, who teach in IM, who are chartered accountants themselves. So I knew how it would be to set up a company by means of, all of the mandatory statutory stuff that was taken care of. So yeah, so for the longest time, and even now, my mother continues to kind of oversee the financial, kind of accuracy, I want to say, and stringency of what we do. So that helps. Yeah.
As you had mentioned, initially you have to burn a lot of money in biotech before you can actually see any result. So in this aspect, what was your biggest challenge while speaking to investors?
Yeah.
Being a startup industry, what was?
So I think the investors had no clue what they were investing in, especially when I went to them. And even now, I think the filter I use in India is I don't think they have a clue about pure biotech investment. And I think it's a different slice altogether in the US or in Europe, where the markets are more mature and there are specific investors who go after specific products. That's one filter to use. The other part of it is that uh, I think if you're able to show them some amount of proof of concept, whether it was done back in a lab or whether it was licensed in, right? That is something that the investor is kind of willing to punt on, saying, okay, here is something, right? Either the founder and a couple of scientists have it and they've done it in a very credible lab, or they have publications and papers to themselves that they're willing to show. That's one kind of leap of faith, right? Saying that, yeah, I need to put in money even without they really kind of having anything to show, so to speak. So for us, in the first one, we did some work in IISc in Raghavan's lab. And of course, the second one was because of the first one, they believed that you could cut it. And so they put in money. So yeah, but we did incubate at CCAM. So that was important too. So I think the incubator ecosystems become important, especially when you want to start off something. And if you have these clusters ready, there's a lot of I want to say a lot of programs running, right, with regard to entrepreneurship within these kind of clusters. And when you kind of hook onto them, that's very helpful.
Hello. So I'm just completing my PhD from ACTREC. I work on cancer biology on a pediatric brain tumor. So I wanted to know when you hire someone, so do you think PhD is a important criteria for the scientist post in your firm, and do you prefer someone who has a experience post PhD?
Right. So I think hiring is a very important question, and it also depends upon the stage of the startup or even other companies, right? And I can give you an experience with regard to startups. It definitely depends upon the stage of the startup and what the startup is trying to build out. So for example, for us in Zumutor, when we knew we were trying to build platforms and these were antibody engineering platforms, we definitely wanted folks who had some kind of experience with that, right? And so we went around hiring 2 positions with experience, and they were PhD postdocs with experience. And then we hired out 2, which had, let's say, like an MTech or an MSc, but with say 1 year of experience, etc. So we ensured that it should suit our purpose, right, with regard to whom we bring in. And then of course there is, we go across to like the IITs, or we go across to any of the, kind of other colleges, so to speak, and then we hire freshers so that we would train them, and then that would suit our service.
I just wanted to ask that, was it challenging to decide upon your pipeline, since most of the Indian companies are right now are in the race of making biosimilars and developing, because it's not easy, but yeah, definitely don't have such challenges which a novel program has. So what was your experience regarding your pipelines, or mostly immuno-oncology part?
I think pipelines are ever changing, and pipelines are so dependent upon funding and who is looking at it at which point, right? So for example, if you're in the US and you have, let's say, Atlas as an investor on your board, they would dictate your pipeline. I don't think you have a choice, right? They're very focused. They know what, this company can do. They will even put CEOs onto the board so that, they kind of very focusedly work on some assets, especially in the immuno-oncology space. But for us sitting here in India, I think it had to do with we differentiating with other like T-cell, B-cell companies or the gene therapy companies, and then seeing if you have a platform, what else can you do? For us too, and Naren knows this, we went to, a biotech firm in Boston called Reichert Consulting, and we shopped around for a pipeline for assets. And, and these are all, we're not a, kind of target discovery company, right? We work on validated targets. So we went around like looking at 120 targets, narrowed it down to 20, and then narrowed it down to 4. And then the question keeps arising, how did you choose this 4, right? So we chose the 4 with some amount of market intelligence. We had to invest in it. We had to kind of spend a lot of money to go figure out, are those the targets that a startup like ours would work on, etc. Because you could become irrelevant in 1 year, right? I mean, somebody could be fucked up.
Every day new discovery comes.
Correct. So we took a punt on saying, let's do something that's at least 4-5 years ahead, right? Something that's less studied. And I think to that extent, Naren would agree, we chose the NK space, at least the NK space is not new. We chose a target that is kind of less studied, so to speak, and then a list of targets. And then we went around kind of wrapping science around it. So that was an approach. But even today we get asked, I mean, why have you chosen this target? You could have gone after something that's a lot easier. Why would you want to prove this biology? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. On a personal front, ma'am, I wanted to ask like how you maintain your fitness level. And I have read your blogs, like you run, you are still so fit and all. So we right now only we feel that and mostly we are so lazy. Like if we try to do something, also it won't go for more than 2-3 days. That's how it is. So, give us some tips about it.
Yeah, before Kavitha answers that question, because I know as modestly she won't say this, but since the lockdown, she has run 7, if not 8 full marathons, 82.
Wow.
Wow.
Awesome.
So yeah, so I think that's another level of madness. But obsession with running, we keep hearing the running lots, keep hearing all these things. But yeah, so I've been athletic throughout, and I kind of chose running, and I think I've chosen a kind of close knit community of friends also, and therefore you kind of socialize like that. And so kind of running is a little bit like that. But I think the comparison that I always use to a startup or, kind of doing something a little more, I want to say long term, is the endurance training. We run for hours, literally aimlessly, right? I mean, that's if you run a marathon, people wonder why. What is the objective of punishing yourself like that? Sometimes a startup is like that. No end in sight, and you keep going like that. So I think that's helped me.
Good analogy.
Wow, you related that to your work, sir.
Hi, this is Purna, and I was also doing a PhD, but now I've decided not to continue. So I would like to know whether how will it affect not having a degree? How will it affect if I choose to go into industry?
Right. So I mean, this is something Naren and I keep chatting about. I don't have a PhD myself. I only have experience, right? So, and sometimes the grass is always greener on the other side with regard to, kind of opportunities that you see that you have a PhD and therefore you get it, etc. But at the end of the day, there is nothing like experience, right? Whether you have a PhD or don't have a PhD, the experience, whether you work in a lab or a company, is that, and nobody can take that away. Coming to your question about, what would probably weigh one over the other, I think only context can answer that, right? Like, for example, contextually, if you wanted to be in academia, then I guess a PhD is most required. But then if you kind of transition out and kind of experience either a startup or like kind of larger biopharmas, there would be levels, of course, of hiring that they would want. But I think today, with what is happening around, I don't think a PhD is a gating process. At least that's what I think, right? I mean, Naren probably has more experience on this, but I can tell you from a startup, it's not a gating experience. Yeah.
So basically, most of us are doing PhD in basic science. So after PhD, if we are trying for startup, any kind of startup, but problem is we have no industrial experience till now. So do you think before going for startup, we should have some industrial experience? Whether it will affect having a industrial experience before the startup will affect, as in it will be helpful or not?
So this is my take on it. I believe that if you're sure you don't want to be in academia and you want to kind of come out of the PhD and not do like a postdoc and get into a startup, there has to be a flavor that you have kind of experienced it, right? So whether you want to intern for 6 months at a startup or intern for 6 months, even at a biopharma company, whichever it is, I think that amount will also shape what you want. You might even work for a startup and say, this is not for me. I want to go to a 9 to 5 job and somebody to pick me up and drop me. And this is not the unpredictability that I want. Right? I mean, a little bit of that. I would think so. It's like you're wrecking something.
This is a bit of a personal, on the personal front. What made you want to leave a 9 to 5 job to join a startup? What drove that transition?
The 9 to 5 job was not suiting me fine, because there was at that point, again, context, right? At that point in that company, there were just not too many things coming together that even technically we were delivering, right? So there was no purpose. When there is no purpose, either you get it right or you make sure the company gets it right. Somewhere something has to change or give, so to speak. So that didn't happen for me, right? And therefore, I found myself, I want to say, fortunately, at the right time, at the right place, where there was a need for biosimilar development. And therefore, kind of investors were looking for it and they didn't know what was happening and they decided to invest. So a lot of things kind of came together. There is no one recipe, right? Saying all the stars will align and therefore you will be successful. At least I don't believe in that. There is a bit of the right time, some luck and a lot of hard work. Yeah.
So how do you keep motivated yourself? As in, you're constantly smiling and you're just bringing positive energy, which I think we are lacking.
I was gripping because I
So what is your mantra, or what do you do to keep motivated?
So there, I mean, the personas vary and there are many ups and downs, but then I think one thing is, especially with entrepreneurship, right? I mean, which is, and I keep sharing these stories, and of course, Naren's my mentor, and so he's heard this. There are some really, really down moments for us, right? As founders or as part of startups, where you don't think that this is going to work, right? And you're like, which side of the bed did I get upon to think that this could be a success? And, I'm 43. Why would I want to waste my life trying to believe that investors, my team, or everything will get their act together and this is going to be hugely successful, right? I mean, there are those down moments where there is so much self-doubt that this would work. Then there are these moments where we are like, if you didn't take a chance now in life, when will you? Right? And those are those kind of I want to say stitched together moments that kind of keep it together. And then very importantly, once you build something for some time, you are responsible for it. I am responsible for investor money. I am responsible for my people of 36. You're a team of 36, right? So I'm therefore I hang on to that responsibility with a lot of respect, saying, there are people's lives in question here, right? And there are people who invested in me, trusted me, and believed that this would work. And so for that, I have to get it right. right? So there are a lot of these factors I want to think that, kind of keep it going. And then there is the uniqueness, right? In India, nobody is doing what we're doing in India, I want to say right now, right? There are multiple people doing different things. And so there is this whole uniqueness that, the team brings in. And then we keep thinking it's going to cut it. And well, with the industry feedback, I think we'll cut it. But there is a very touch and go moments for us, right? It's and startups are never secure with money. Except, of course, I keep telling Kiran that's the most secure startup if it's going to be Bicara or Immunil, but that's not true too.
Ma'am, what is your definition for success? And how do you take care of risk associated with such startups where you are completely getting into a completely new thing which is not so known in India or Indian culture or Indian scientific culture? So how do you take care of that risk associated with it?
Right. So one uh, is risk. One has to take a bet. Very rarely is it cushioned. Then if it's so cushioned, it is not called risk, right? Then everybody could have done it. Then why are you doing it, right? So that's one thing. I mean, that's like a how do you say, a road less traveled, so to speak. Either you have an appetite for that or you don't have an appetite. If you do have an appetite, stick to it, right? And then kind of build yourself around that, because you went down that journey of saying it's fine that I don't know tomorrow what's going to happen, right? Having done that, in the second startup, it was definitely not the same as the first one. First one was uncertain in its own ways. The second one now is being uncertain in its own ways. But there is a lot of surety around certain things which you have to build. Is it surety on the science? Then build it out, right? We're very sure about our science. Is it unsurety around the money? Yeah, money will come, money will go, but there will be people who believe in the science and therefore it will go ahead, right? So that's one part of it. So I don't know, at least in my kind of words, I don't know if there is so much certainty in what we do in startups, right? I mean, it has a certain momentum, it goes ahead. There will be markets, those markets may believe this will work, and then you might succeed. It is most possible that certain startups won't do well because those markets don't exist anymore in these times, right? And you have seen this in this COVID times. There are things that never worked, and we thought those industries would work, right? So I think those are the two. I don't know if I've covered everything, but that's the risk part of it.
I think certainty versus defining certainty versus uncertainty is a very good thought. I actually wrote it down. Any other thoughts? So Kavitha, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey a little bit, because I think that'll enable people to think about the question. Because one thing that I see that none of them have asked a question around what it would take to be an entrepreneur themselves. Like what are the factors if someone wanted to start their own business? What should they be thinking of? Maybe
Right.
a journey, and then that'll steer some questions around that space.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and since I think everybody is in the space of biotech, biology broadly, I think, kind of this is, I can give you more context to it, right? So in the first startup, when we were trying to build a pipeline of biosimilars, the first thing that we kind of did, and this was just three of us, the first thing we did was, if you have to go to an investor, you need to show some data, right? I mean, you need to show that either you have some clones with you, or you need to show that you've already done something. So all of this was not there with us. So we started doing clone development, and we put in our money, kind of into this. We got 2 scientists in ISC to kind of work on this, and we did show some clone development data. Right? Of course, the investor did not understand what that clone meant, but then it is important for us to kind of have that conversation with them saying this has the potential for possible licensing, because at that point, licensing was the game. So the important part of the construct of even going to an investor saying we needed external money because we wanted to build out a lab, we wanted to hire people, we wanted a pipeline, etc., was to show that initial data saying, what you're going to do, right? So we did that with 2 products actually back then. One was parathyroid hormone, PTH, that we were doing, right? A microbial asset, and we were able to kind of uniquely show some stuff. And then we started working on rituximab, and at that time on a DG44 cell line. Now, of course, all the fancy expression systems exist, and that time it was not there. So we went around doing this, and we had just some milligrams of stuff. We purified it, and we knew all those processes. So I think that clicked. that you knew what you can't fake it to make it. You have to know solidly what you have to do, right? This faking to making it is a very short term thing, and then it's not going to people will believe you for probably 5 minutes, right? And after that, once you poke holes in this whole thing, it'll fall flat. So be very solid, right? If it's data, be very solid with the data. If it has to be an audience that is not scientific, make sure you have enough market information, because they know the markets, right? And therefore they're going to question you on the market. So you should spend some time and money possibly in getting market information. And then of course it's important to see kind of who puts their best foot forward, right? If you are going to be the liaison within the investor or kind of a partner, then you've got to know what to say to them, and the other people need to kind of play their act. So this is a bit like a theatrical performance, right? Who takes center stage at which point, and who kind of plays the background. Everybody can't kind of, then it's cacophony and not symphony, right? So kind of thing. A symphony, actually, Naren, you should use that.
Love it.
So yeah, that's a couple of things that at least in the first startup we got together. And then of course you build out a pipeline, then you have some customers, then you kind of do very sincere customer engagement. You also do some amount of use case with them. Everything is not about upfront milestone monies coming to you, right? You've got to prove that you're good. So one of the things we've started doing is kind of working with important partners. Like example, you probably know Vijay Kuchru, right? He's been on the Biocon kind of scientific advisory board. So we have worked with Vijay Kuchru's lab in now on a novel cytokine that he wanted developed, etc. And we've kind of got a couple of hits from our library. We've given it to him, etc. So that was done literally free, right? All of this because we wanted to build out this relationship with the hope that ultimately when he does a publication, we are included in that, right? So everything is not about kind of getting a partner. There's money involved. There's also the relationship to be built. So that's one part of it. The science is kind of has to be absolutely kind of solid. I think the other part is to get your team. The team has to be very, very vested, right? If you get a motley mix of people from industry, people from academia, and then a couple of freshers who see your vision, and then they're going forward in being a part of the journey. And we have some amazing people who've stayed like 7 years with this gig, and they ultimately kind of see what is the end game, correct? And imagine being vested is also being vested in the risk of it, right? The end game may not turn out to be like the way we envisioned it to be. It could be, kind of a sliver of that. The fact that they have the appetite for it, and you kind of ensure you give them ESOPs, you give them, you build out the risk appetite for them too, right? It's not about just the monies. So it's all about how participative they are in it, etc. So these are the broad constructs I want to say in kind of this journey, at least what I've learned with this. I'm sure I have a lot more to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. So any questions on the entrepreneurial part or any other point?
Ma'am, when you said like you approach people from IISc and stuff for your initial part of your journey. So what was their response like when a completely new person who is entering into entrepreneurship is asking for help from this scientist? What was their reaction or what was their approach? Were they positive, or what questions they had in their mind when you actually approached them?
Right. So one is, I think once you're in this space, any of the academic things are not new. You're kind of familiar with them, right? Otherwise, you're not going to go to them. So this is not like one of those greenfield things where you completely kind of jump into the waters, you're kind of trying to, swim around. That's not what it is. You zone in very clearly. You use the connections and the contacts that you already have, and then you kind of go through them to do it. So I think, and we know this, right? We even as individuals, even if you have to kind of apply for something, we automatically do enough research around, whom you're approaching, why you're talking to them, what is the lab that they work with, what are they working with, etc., and see what are the connects you already have. So that foot in the door we had, right? And that's how we went. Yeah, and we do that even now. For example, with Naren, like we use his connections in the US for introductions, and then we go across kind of speaking to multiple collaborators, scientists, VCs, etc. So we need that. We all do, but we ensure that we don't get into an introduction without doing enough research of what that other person is doing. Yeah.
And does marketing plays major role, like the way your website is built or other features, basically how much you put in information there. And also we get attracted to, say, some site, like if Amazon has put its biosimilar very clearly this thing. So even I have seen your website. So how much role you feel all these plays?
I think in these colonial times, as I want to call it, it's more important to be out there with regard to what you do, because with more people spending more time either on either social media or relevant media, so to speak, to see what they want, it's very important to be out there, whether it be your own profile or how much of your information you want to put out there, or how much of the company information if it's a startup that you want to put out there. I think that's the major mode of kind of information and communication right now.
Yeah, I want to know that how important it is to succeed in the initial phase of a startup, because your subsequent fundings from investors is based on that. Especially if you're a new person to this field with minimum experience.
Right. So I think, kind of success is what you define as your endpoints, right? And in biotech, you already know this. If you're in the cell line development space, if you've proven that your product, that is, let's say, an antibody that you're developing in your cell line has reached a particular titer, and that is going to be defined as your endpoint, and then you're going to go to the investor, you have to meet that endpoint, right? And then you go to the investor, and you can call that success. But if you decide, I want to portray, let's say, a pipeline of 4 assets, and all I need is hits from a library, and that is enough, and I can go ahead to an investor because that investor is looking for that, then that is an endpoint, and therefore that is success, correct? So I think it's important to filter what you outline to yourself as milestones of success. And that's very important because the investor wants to see that clarity, right? They want to see how clear are you in going after what you're telling us that you're going after. So those would be the kind of things I would say as success points that one would want to achieve, even for the investor's sake.
Is there a discussion that happens? Sorry. Sorry, I was just wondering, is that a discussion that happens between you and the investor, defining those milestones prior to the investment happening?
So I think the discussion of milestones has to happen with your team first, because the team is going to deliver on milestones. And then once you think it's realistic, you go to the investor and say, here are the milestones. They might jump the whole thing and say, come to us after 2 milestones, right? Don't come to us when you're just saying you've got hits off the library. It is possible that they could do that, right? So I think calibrating what are the milestones for what you're developing out, especially let's say in biotech, let's say all the way from sequence, till let's say a 10-liter batch. If you consider that as 3 milestones, then you define that and go to them. And they might say, that's fine, all this is fine, come to us when you've achieved 10-liter scale, so that's a conversation you have after you have internal clarity.
Okay.
Remaining question, yeah. Tripti, go ahead, and then Surekha.
How to choose the right kind of investor for your startup, because since you said that the investors in India are not very much familiar with the kind of work we do. So how do you approach an investor? If that investor has some basic knowledge or understanding of the field, or it could be someone who hardly has any understanding.
So I want to say that the reason we flipped in Zumutor from being an Indian company to a US company until today, it's 2020 on why we did it, is that we thought that the investors in the US, and I believe it is so, are very mature and they look at biotech or biologics in a certain way. And therefore, because of the investors, the IPs, assets, etc., we flipped to being a US company. So today I'm a Boston-based US company with a wholly owned subsidiary in India. I did that for the same purposes that you're asking this question, that I wanted investors that I could choose who know biotech and therefore invest in biotech. That's one way of approaching the issue. The other is to sit here in India and continue to educate the current set of investors, saying, please, this is worth your while. This is worth your a shot that you could take, etc. Today, the ecosystem in India is brilliant. The DBT is doing so much work. I mean, the Indian government is doing so much work in the entrepreneurial space. That was not the case in 2015 when I flipped. So today, I live to tell the tale that I regret I flipped, and then I want to do this Tughlaki move or moving back, which is a very, very expensive thing to do, because you need to move assets, IP, everything. And I did it for a cost of $3 million. Today, I don't have $3 million to flip it back. right? I mean, I need to buy it back into the Indian entity. So this whole thing of, certain startups do very well with the flip, and they have proven to do well. I hope to tell the same story, hopefully in 2 years from now, that I did flip and I did the right move. But I also am very cognizant of how useful it is to be in India, how important it is to be in India. And I think somewhere deep down, it's very it's a sense of pride that you're here in India doing work within the Indian ecosystem. There is so much knowledge, there is so much I want to say enthusiasm of kind of getting there first, kind of seeing what progress could be within India. So I think for those reasons, there is a lot of pride that I have that we are here. For all of the other commercial reasons, we are a US company, and I got to live with that.
So, what do you feel is very different from China versus India when it comes to developing these kind of therapies? Is it the government funding? Do you think there's any particular thing that India is really not doing more of to help biotech companies to grow and be as competitive as the other countries are?
So when it comes to China and the rest of the world, I heard this really nice thing on Naren, and you probably heard this. So and it goes like this. It says, while the rest of the world is playing chess, China is playing Go. Correct? I mean, and that is so true, right? And so when it comes to China, forget biotech. I mean, whether it be world dominance, right? They have got plans which are 100 years ahead, right? When you have plans that are 100 years ahead and not 5 to 10 years, you make bets and you make investments that are bombastic. Correct. So it's not about biotech, biologics will I kind of build the next 20,000 liter fermenter or whatever. They have built out cities floating on oceans so that they could meet demands. Correct. So I think their vision, especially in biotech, leave alone other spaces, has been kind of phenomenal. How they decide to do what they do is kind of geopolitical stuff, which I don't want to get into. But I think for kind of democracies like ours, we have different issues that we have systemically faced. And to kind of battle that and say, this is how I measure progress is a different yardstick. You can't measure it. It's not like to like, right? What you can do like to like is quality of product. That you can, and there are measures for that, and that you've got to live up to that standard, correct? So I think that's more like it. And and therefore I don't, how do you say, I don't have an opinion on the geopolitical stuff, but I do have an opinion on the economics of it, the viability of the quality of it, etc. Yeah.
You think the markets are more mature there to understand the long-term implications of whatever you're putting out as compared to anywhere in the world?
I think the economies of scale work the best there. It's purely right? It would probably work the best there. But with regard to, I want to say, indications it meets purely innovation-driven stuff, at least with the little I know, I don't think it's the same as probably the US, or it's the same as some parts of Europe with regard to innovation. They have taken models and replicated it and shown the world that it's absolutely possible to replicate it. I don't know if some of the models that they've created are purely originally their own, but then you could always say, who cares, right? It works. So who cares who got there first, right? So, I mean, those are all philosophical debates, but yeah, this is what I think.
One of the reasons I invited Kavitha to talk to you, among the many reasons, is if you wanted to start a new company yourself, be it in biotechnology or maybe open a pawn shop next to your house, I think that is the kind of question that I wanted you to sort of think about, because she is a sort of role model for you and for me to say, let's do this, let's take this risk and jump into the deep side and do it. So maybe if you think there's a question around that space you want to ask, I'll invite you to ask that kind of question.
Okay, I'll make a comment on this because Naren said that. Sorry, Aprishita, I'll tell you this. So Naren, when we were doing these complex, kind of negotiations with destined partners, trying to see who next we could license to, what kind of data room driven conversations we could have, etc. This simple thing that gave me great joy over the weekend was my cousin does home cooking meals, right? I mean, she lost her job, and so she's an amazing home cook, and she's been doing really nice, awesome Malayali food. And what they did was they just packed like 20, parcels, literally like tiffin carriers, like the dabbawalas that you have in Bombay, tiffin carriers. And I mean, I introduced them to my apartment complex, and then we set up this whole Google Sheet form, and then people did it. And we had business going, amazing business and traction just in 2 days. That gave me such amazing pleasure. When you spoke about pawn shop, I was thinking of this. The opportunity that is there right today is amazing. You could do many things. I mean, biotech, theek hai, that's what we have learned to do, so we do.
Exactly, ma'am. So that only I wanted to ask, like, we should always have a plan B kind of thing when you are, when you are actually thinking to do something in your lane. Say, I want to do something in biotech or something. And so is there, there is always, a lot of uncertainty around. So did you had any, your plan B or going back to, your job, or you just
I used to tell my investors this. See, I don't know something useful like carpentry or something, right? I only did biotech. I'm not useful otherwise. If you keep, they did this in my first startup. They said, these are the non-solicit, non-compete clauses, and they wrote everything in biotech possible in the non-compete clause. Then this is when I argued with them. I don't know anything. I can't cook. I can't do carpentry or plumbing. What do you want me to do? I can only do biotech. So I need to work. So you can't have these clauses. The same example, I didn't have a plan B. I mean, I don't have a plan B. We don't have opportune moments when, kind of we grew up where like Naren can give concerts and, probably invite people over and have a plan B and C. But I don't have these. I can probably paint a bit, or do something. It's more hobby-like. But I think in entrepreneurship, the dive into the deep end is the risk. You don't think of a plan B when you're diving, right? You're not thinking, oh, no, I will reach now 8 feet. I don't want to go up to 16. I want to surface now. It doesn't work. You have to touch 16 and come up, right? So I think it's a bit like that. If you go into it saying, I want a plan B, I'm not sure that works. But then if you're cognizant that, hey, I do need multiple plans because I'm involved, not only in it, I have different people. I think there is also the whole, kind of building around it that is very realistic, right? So to your question, I knew very well if this didn't work, I have to wrap it all up and go back to working. Probably go back to Kiran and say, "Hey, I need a job."
Yeah.
And so there is no for me there is no lack of dignity in eating humble pie. That I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a very good question and very good answer.
How much trust you should put on, like, and definitely trust is needed with people who you are working, and also I think that's very important for any organization. But how you should blindly believe on someone, or how much you should trust upon? Is there any mantra to that?
Yeah. No, you live, you learn, right? I mean, this startup, kind of my co-founder flew the coop, went to the US, started another company, and he was actually supposed to do kind of business development for this company, etc. Things happen, right? I mean, all of this, it's like life takes over, things happen, people quit, people do other things, and you learn. But then I think the mantra, so to speak, is I don't think you can distrust and therefore say I am protected. You've got to trust, and you've got to trust wholeheartedly. Things could happen that may not be what you envisioned, but then that's the only way to go forward, right? So if you didn't take that leap of faith, I don't think you would move even one step forward. That's the way I would take. And I think over some time, experience also teaches you, you won't be too foolish. You might make some mistakes, but you won't kind of be off the deep end so much.
Let's say if you had an idea or a concept or something that you want to develop into a business, hypothetically speaking, at what stage do you think, I think one issue that I would think personally, if I'm trying to develop something is, am I in the right stage? Do I have the right kind of knowledge to make this into something that could work as a company or a technology that's functional. So what do you do in that instance? Do you define like this is the point I need some more experience perhaps in industry? I need to do some courses. Do I need to have a more functional kind of what do you call a working kind of system to explain like when do you start like dedicating your time solely into developing a technology or pharmaceutical or anything in that line?
So I think it's very industry dependent, right? So if you want to be, let's say, in the chai making space, you better know how to make chai. You can't fake your way through that, right? So when is the right time to make the chai and to go and pitch to your investor? It's about you knowing the investor, you having scale. Do you make unique
Right.
chai? You just some kadak chai wala who is just like the other. You got to differentiate yourself, right? I mean, I'm kind of oversimplifying this, but I'm just trying to tell you. In certain spaces, the competition, or let's say the demand itself, necessitates kind of people to jump into it. A good example is the mobility space before COVID hit, right? If you look at Zomato, if you look at Swiggy, if you look at Dunzo, if you look at any of those people, there was captive markets that these guys who were in the e-com space just kind of took over that and said 1.2 billion people, there'll be three more startups in the mobility space that we can do, correct? Like, last mile connectivity, etc. That's a captive space. Whereas in development spaces like ours, you have to kind of get to the edge of technology. Today, if you make a pitch in AI or ML, if you were in the fringe of it, nobody is going to take it, right? Because people know it. So if you're in the Bitcoin space, you better know all of it. You better have enough backers in that space to kind of get into it. So I think it's contextually very kind of vertical or domain dependent, right? And therefore you got to know enough of that, at least have enough people or advisors, or kind of enough people backing you on that, saying yes, I think you know enough, now is a good time to go kind of pitch or start.
Ma'am, like after establishing yourself in this industry, suppose if a person, a completely new person with say a like newcomer is approaching you for its startup or something, so do you in future plan to invest in such startups?
When I make the money, Naren, remember that. When I make the money. I have not yet made monies. I intend to make monies. And when I do, I definitely intend to invest in startups. Yeah. And there are some spaces that are, very dear to me and I would want to invest, but I still have to cut it. I've still not made it as yet.
Yeah. Kavitha, it's a matter of time. Your perseverance in your marathon running is definitely going to bleed over to your work for sure. Again, any question so far?
I had one, if we have time.
I don't know how much time Kavitha has. We are on the top of the hour.
Yeah.
I'm okay for another 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay. I have several questions, but I have lots of opportunities to ask you those outside of this. But so Sureka, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. You had mentioned that it's important to have your milestones set and ready before you approach an investor as to what your endpoint is for your product. So my question to you is that after you pitch in these milestones and your idea to the investor and they're on board with it, how involved are they in the entire process while you're doing the work for it? Are they
Right.
dictating or is it equal or?
Yeah, so I think again, the filter to use is, are they investors who are from the same domain or space, right? And therefore they get really involved. But if they're not, they would typically track your spend, right? They will typically track time and spend because that's what they understand. Whereas if it's going to be investors in the biotech space, right? Like, for example, think of it. If you folks were on an investment board and somebody had to come with you to, and provide milestones, you will track the technology behind it. You will track it saying, I think you guys are slow, you need to do these things faster, you will give some inputs, etc. So that is a tech, kind of biology tech investor. They would track it like that. Whereas a pure financial investor would only look at, have you hit milestones like the way you said you would, and at what point of time have you hit it, etc. So those would be the kind of things that they would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. All right. So if there are no other pressing questions,
Ma'am, one more, like, who is your role model?
I think, yeah. This is an often asked question, and sometimes depending upon the phase in my life, it varies, right? So I think there's a lot to be said about the role that my mother and sister play, and with what they do. So yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
hmm, hmm.
And ma'am, am I audible? Yes. So I want to know your vision, as in where you see yourself in the next 5 years, and how do you make sure that your startup don't turn irrelevant in the future? How
Right.
do you make sure that happens?
I'm hoping it doesn't become irrelevant, just like the way we think, the immuno-oncology space will not, kind of be irrelevant. But no, I think specific to your question, at least the vision that I've kind of put out, and at least I want to say the grit and endurance, and we would see this through, is that in the same time next year, we want to IND file for our asset. And I think most of those kind of key milestones are in place, and you know what it takes to do an IND filing. So I think that part is in place. The monies are always in question. It will follow. We have some licensing opportunities, so that should see. So I want to say, in 2 years from now, if we can strategically kind of license some of the assets in the pipeline and get this lead asset into phase one, that's a vision that we have. So that's one part of it. How will we make ourselves not irrelevant? I think it's important to kind of choose assets, indications, the kind of market play that it has, therefore partners, etc. That would be one approach kind of to it, right? And so you're constantly on the move. For example, we are spending a lot of money now buying reports with regard to this indication, saying, is this the only combination or in monotherapy that it could be used, or multiple other combinations, and therefore what other work should we do, etc. So there's a lot of work with regard to being relevant, right? Because it's an ever-changing landscape. And so yeah, so that work is getting done. And there's a lot of money and time invested in that.
Mhm. Mm.
Okay. All right, good. So Kavitha, I think we're running out of time. So why don't we sort of close with some comments from you, and then I'm going to connect you. If anybody is interested, I'll connect. I'll give them your contact information. So if there are any specific personal questions that they want to ask, they can ask you offline. But any final comments from you then before we close?
No, so thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure connecting with you folks. And if my urge would be that you don't do the usual spiel of trying to think all of what you kind of either work in your PhDs or kind of work forward is linear. Try and do things a little exponential, because I think that is the need of the hour. Being very constructive linearly is only going to get you somewhere, someplace in some time. But I think you should shake it up a bit. And I hope you do it in your own way, right? Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Kavitha, again. I ask you this question.
Thank you.
I recorded the session for people who generally want to hear it later on.
A network should last a lifetime. Let us help you create lasting professional relationships with our world-class mentors through the Biopatrika Industry Mentorship Program. A strategic guidance program unlike no other, full of expert interviews, industry internship opportunities, CV writing, inflection point analysis, life maps, and of course, the gateway to your dream career. For a limited time only, all our services are freely available for you, as we truly want you to succeed.